I am delighted to welcome Lord Ezra to open the 10th Annual Fuellers Energy Lecture. Derek Ezra is a liveryman of the Worshipful Company of Fuellers and has a long and distinguished career in the energy industry. He has been a great supporter of the Fuellers from its inception, and it now gives me great pleasure to invite Lord Ezra to introduce the Fuellers 10th Annual Energy Lecture.
Master and friends, I had the great pleasure 10 years ago of inaugurating the Fuellers Annual Energy Lectures and giving the first one. I am delighted that these lectures have become a fixture in the Fuellers calendar, much helped by the co-sponsorship of S.J. Berwin, who are represented here by Mr. Neil Upton, who is a partner in the firm and concerned with energy and infrastructure projects. Today we have the great benefit of hearing the 10th lecture from Mr. David Gray, the chairman of Ofgem, who are very much in the news. The memoir about me, which is being launched on this occasion, has, I know, been supported by many past masters, and in particular by Brigadier Edward Wilkinson, Michael Briar-Ash, the father of the Fuellers, Paul Glover, John Bainbridge, David Port, and of course the present master, and by many others, as well as by the coal meters. When the project was originally put to me, I demurred. I had not written anything personal about my time in the coal industry, although this had been suggested. But eventually I accepted the kind proposal from the Fuellers, and am particularly indebted to Paul Glover, who masterminded the project, and to Roderick Braithwaite, who edited it, having previously written the excellent history of the Fuellers, which I'm sure you have all read. I am grateful to the many friends and colleagues who have contributed to the memoir and whose names are listed in it. I go back a long way in the energy sector, as far back as 1947, when I joined the newly formed National Coal Board on coming out of the wartime army, and have remained actively engaged in the sector ever since, and occasionally go to the House of Lords to ask questions on energy, just to show that I am still around. I would like on this somewhat nostalgic occasion to recall some of the leading personalities in the coal trade I dealt with during my time at the NCB. I am sure they will have been known to many of you. I refer in particular to Sir John Charrington and his son Jack, who died much too early, to Douglas Corey Wright, to Lester Horne and his son Dick, who sadly died recently, and to Charles Stevenson Clark, founder master of the Fuellers. I must also refer to my eminent predecessor as chairman of the NCB, Lord Robins. He was a remarkable person who, among other achievements, carried out a large number of pit closures with great skill and understanding. He was also an outstanding orator. I remember being present at a large gathering of housewives in Eastbourne, whom he addressed on the mundane subject of domestic boilers. He spoke with such passion and with such wit that they gave him a prolonged standing ovation. During my time as chairman of the NCB, I had the occasion to meet a number of prime ministers, and I feel you may be interested in my dealings with them. When I was going through my remarks with the Master and Michael Briar-Ash, I said I was dubious about including this as it might appear pretentious, but they persuaded me it would be of interest. So here goes. I start with the redoubtable Mrs. Thatcher. I first met her before she became Prime Minister, when she was leader of the opposition. We had invited her to a Coal Industry Society lunch, and I gave her a lift to her next appointment. During our short journey, she said to me, "The trouble with your industry is that you are dragging us back into the 19th century." I tried in vain to talk about the advances in mining technology, coal usage, and coal derivatives. She was entirely unimpressed. On another occasion, the group of chairmen of the nationalized industries invited her to lunch to explain that our aim was to operate commercially in a competitive market. We had barely started when she put up her hand and said that commercial operations and nationalized industries were a contradiction in terms, and then looked at her watch and said she had to go to another meeting. We were left to eat the lunch in some disarray. There is no doubt about Mrs. Thatcher's remarkable talents and indeed her courage. She expressed herself very firmly and gave little opportunity for response. Mr. Heath was quite different in my experience. He listened to what you said and then just nodded, so you did not know what he was thinking. But he too was a remarkable person. From relatively humble beginnings, he rose to the top of whatever he turned to, whether it was politics or sailing or music. At this point, I shall mention something which I believe has not been known before. On the morning of the 4th of February 1974, I received 2 visitors at my office in Hobart House, the headquarters of the NCB. They were Campbell Adamson, the Director General of the CBI, and Len Murray, the General Secretary of the TUC. They came to discuss ways of ending the miners' strike, which was beginning to cause serious industrial difficulties. They said that if the miners were treated as a special case, they would do everything possible, speaking for the 2 organizations, to ensure that there were no other breaches of the pay limits which were then in force. This was an important development. Previously, the TUC on their own had made such a proposal to the government, which had been turned down. But now there was a commitment from both sides of industry. I said we should immediately seek a meeting with the Prime Minister to let him know. I rang Downing Street to ask for a meeting that afternoon, and they said they would ring back. However, shortly afterwards, I heard on the news that Parliament was to be dissolved and a general election held. We were too late. That is not the end of the story. I have been reading the final volume of Tony Benn's diaries, covering the years 2001 to 2007. On the 23rd of July 2002, he visited Mr. Heath at his home near Salisbury Cathedral, which Ben described as beautiful and with a large, well-kept garden. They had a long chat, during the course of which Ben put it to him, and now I quote, that if he had not called the election in March 1974, but had settled with the miners, and then appealed to everybody to help him with inflation, he might have won, and he agreed with that. That's the end of the quotation. Subsequent history might have been very different if Mr. Heath had pursued that course. If you were to ask me who was the Prime Minister I met with whom it was easiest to have a conversation, I would reply Mr. Wilson. He would sit there quietly smoking his pipe and then respond, and the conversation would continue until a conclusion was reached. Dealing with Mr. Callaghan was similar. I remember seeing him in the latter part of 1977 when he told me that he had been approached by the NUM who wanted to talk to him about their latest wage claim. He asked my advice. I told him that he should not see them. I reminded him of the difficulties that had arisen during the Heath regime when Downing Street had got involved with the NUM. He agreed, and we subsequently dealt with the wage claim in the usual way and settled within our limits. I did not meet Mr. Macmillan when he was Prime Minister, but met him subsequently on social occasions when he was in what he called his anecdotage. I found him witty and genial and full of interesting recollections. I heard his historic speech in the House of Lords when he criticised the government of his own party for selling the family silver. I never met the great Winston Churchill, but saw him at a function in the National Liberal Club when he was present at the unveiling of a portrait of himself. I hasten to add that it was not the portrait by Graham Sutherland presented to him by the House of Commons which he hated and which his wife subsequently burnt. On the occasion of the ceremony at the NLC, he said he was glad to be among old friends, referring to his time as a Liberal when he was President of the Board of Trade in the famous Liberal government of Mr. Asquith in 1906. Talking of the National Liberal Club, which was opened by Mr. Gladstone in the 1880s, I wish I could say that I had met the grand old man, as Mr. Gladstone was known, but in spite of my age, that would be stretching it a bit, as he died in 1898. As you are doubtless aware, Queen Victoria did not much like Mr. Gladstone, whom she said addressed her as if she were a public meeting. She much preferred Mr. Disraeli, who flattered her and made her Empress of India after acquiring the Suez Canal, which a century later Sir Anthony Eden tried unsuccessfully to retain. But enough of reminiscences. We must return from the 19th century to the present. I would like to conclude my remarks by telling you briefly what has been the purpose of my recent interventions in the House of Lords. This has been to draw attention to the problem of energy security, especially in the short term. We are now importing over 50% of the gas we use. But there is a serious risk of perturbation in the international gas market, especially during the winter, because of problems in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. The safeguard in the short term would be to increase our gas storage capacity so that we could store gas in the summer against winter demands. Germany has 4 times as much as our capacity, Italy 3 times, and France twice. Our other problem is the low level of spare electricity capacity over and above that which is estimated to be required in the winter months. This has now fallen as low as 2%, which is much too low. In the short term, the safeguard would be to bring back some of the mothballed capacity. There are, of course, many other aspects of energy policy, but I will say no more, or I will trespass on what Mr. Gray has to say to us. Before he speaks, I would like to make a presentation to the fuelers to mark this occasion. I have here a medallion struck in 1849 to commemorate the opening by Prince Albert of what was known as the new coal exchange in Thames Street. This was the largest cast iron building of its time, and there is an outline of it on the medallion. It was in an act of sheer vandalism pulled down in 1962 to make way for a road widening scheme. This could not have happened today, when we have more respect for the past. I hand this to you, Master, to be added to the collection of memorabilia held by the fuelers.
Lord Ezra, thank you very much indeed, and I accept this on behalf of the Worshipful Company of Fuelers, and we will put this in our displays at Skinner's Hall, which is our new home in Dowgate Hill.
Cool.
Thank you. Lord Ezra, it gives me great pleasure to be here today on behalf of the Court of the Worshipful Company of Fuelers to present you with honorary livery status in recognition of all you've done for the company since its inception.
Master, I'm most grateful for this honour that you've paid me, and I would like to thank all members of the Fuelers Company for supporting this proposition. Much as I would like to have done so, I think it would be difficult for me to attend the 20th annual lecture, as I would then be 105, but who knows?